Welcome. Today we are going to give you one more bonus lecture. This is on cynicism, which is really the third of the philosophies of life that were dominating Athens during the same time as Epicureanism and hedonism, which followed, and Stoicism, along with notions of skepticism, which are intertwined with that one. Here, the movement of cynicism is sometimes called the shortcut to virtue. It's rather radical and rather extreme, and whether or not you believe it'll be a shortcut to virtue is really up to you. In this discussion, we will address Antisthenes, the proto-founder of cynicism. Some will say he is the founder, but that's up for debate. Diogenes, who's usually regarded as the founder of cynicism, as well as the writings of Tellus and Julian the Apostate on what they see as the value of cynicism. Oscar Wilde once thought of a cynic as a man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. Which sounds like a nice turn of a phrase, but there's some meaning behind that. That nothing has a value. That having nothing, having no attachments, being detached from all of your worldly possessions has a value for you. That everything that you take in has a price. And this is much closer to the true philosophy of cynicism than just whatever ideas that exist for many of us. The Cynics have a different approach to reality. They aren't Epicureans and they're not Stoics. They push back against both of these systems of thought and think that both are a little right and a little bit wrong, and therefore they proceed from a different position, right? They deny that reason can give us what we need to succeed. Therefore, Stoicism is out. It's no good. They also deny all social conventions. The conventions of what life would be like, both in the political world and elsewhere, has really no value. And as such, they're going to do some radical and crazy things. So let this serve as your advisory that today's discussion is going to be a little more off, graphic, disgusting, inappropriate for small children than some of our other discussions have been. The proto-founder of cynicism is a man by the name of Antisthenes, 445 to 365 BC, oftentimes called the proto-founder because he holds many of the ideas of cynicism and shows a lot of what cynicism will become, but kind of denies it and pushes it away, or is held for a different sort of priority than others. He was a critic of Athenian society and wrote many different tracts showing how the social conventions and life in Athens was wrong, was an error. But then he encountered Socrates and he burned all of his writings, so we don't know what they actually were. And he changed his philosophy as a result of his encounter with Socrates and endeavored to accept the idea that there is virtue, and in this virtue one can be happy. His notion of virtue is similar to Aristotle's notion of eudaimonia, but it's actually a different Greek word to which he thinks that we should aspire to, and that is the word of arete. Arete, instead of just being thriving, is much more closer to the idea of personal excellence, and in many ways just the word virtue that we have in English as well. And Antisthenes and Plato actually end up debating as far as that very basic idea of, can you be virtuous? And if you are virtuous, where does that come from? For Plato, this was all something ingrained, and his interpretation of Socrates was that you can't teach somebody virtue. Antisthenes always rejected this idea, saying virtue has to be able to be something that's taught because I learned it from Socrates myself. And so look, I learned virtue, therefore it can be something that's taught. And Socrates was my teacher. Now, obviously, the interpretation of Socrates we have from Plato and his works of Meno and others doesn't really lend to this idea. But Antisthenes believes that this was the case. In many ways, Antisthenes is a cynic. He has all of the hallmarks of cynicism that comes later, and this is why a lot of people will dispute the founding of it and say Antisthenes and his followers were earlier cynics. Right? They abandoned everything they owned, like cynicism advocates later. Although Antisthenes and his followers did this to listen to Socrates and to follow him. They had very few possessions, something that's a hallmark of later cynicism, notably just the cloak and bag, in living wherever they can find shelter, something that we see very clear in later cynics like Diogenes and those who follow after him. Like later cynics as well, they didn't have any jobs. They didn't pursue a livelihood in the modern world. They didn't engage in civil life in Athens. They had an emphasis on self-denial and rejection of what they saw as unnecessary material objects. Extreme minimalism in ways that are beyond what even minimalists today would think of. Because of this extreme minimalism and this rejection of most of the things of this world, cynicism is called a shortcut to virtue. And some of this ideas of self-denial and minimalism is a good idea of being virtuous, right? Not trying to pursue more material gain is something we would see as virtuous. Some of the other things that they do by denying the rest of social conventions, we often will push back on. But we'll see within Antisthenes and his followers many of the hallmarks of what we will see with later cynics following those of Diogenes. So where does the name cynic come from? Well, there's two possible answers to this, and there might actually both be somewhat true. The first is that the word cynic comes from the Greek word for dog, and the cynics, as we think of them and construct them, lived their lives like dogs. They didn't care about the social conventions of Athens. They carried out all, and I mean all, of their bodily functions out in public. They found shelter wherever they could. They ate whatever they could scrounge up, and their life seemed much more animalistic than what a good Athenian would want to imagine. The second possible origin for the name comes from the Cynosargus, which is a gymnasium that is literally meaning the place of the white dog. So the word dog is applied in this way as well. And this was a location that Antisthenes would hold lectures. And so if we hold this idea, we can kind of imagine ourselves in Athens at this time and going over here to the gymnasium, to the place of the white dog, and hearing cynic lectures, going over to the colonnades, to the Stoa, and hearing Stoicism coming out, or going over to Epicurus's garden outside of the city gate and engaged in Epicurean dialogues. It might just be fun for imagination, but we can kind of see all three of these finding their different niche in their different area within Athenian society to hold lectures, to advance their philosophical message, and to try to show what they think life should be like. Generally speaking, the agreed upon founder of Cynicism is a man called Diogenes, sometimes called the Cynic Diogenes or Diogenes the Cynic, because, again, he's identified as the founder of this movement. He lived from 403 to 323 BC and really lived as a dropout in a self-stylized exile in Athens during the time of Aristotle. And he demonstrated that life, apart from any social conventions, can be just as good as those following all of the conventions that Aristotle and others advocated for. He demonstrated what he thought was human nature. And this becomes a big part of his argument is, what is it that we can actually know about human nature? And in many ways we see the similar argument existing within the Stoic branch of ideology of skepticism. Diogenes showed that all people, even those who have no desire for abstract speculation, can gain from interrogating their values and ideas about what makes a satisfying life. Probably one of the more famous accounts of Diogenes is an encounter he had with Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great once said if he could be any other man, he would be Diogenes. Diogenes, when asked if he could be anyone else other than himself, responded, "Why would I want to be anyone but me?" Different ways of looking at it, right? But at one point, Diogenes was laying out in the sun, and Alexander, again, who admired Diogenes a large amount, came up to Diogenes and said, "Diogenes, I'll give you anything you want up to half of my kingdom. What would you like? What can I give you? I admire you so much." And Diogenes' response was very simple. "Get out of my sun. Get out of my way. I'm over here enjoying the sun and you're blocking it. All I need is the sun. Get away from me. Go away." Which is a really odd thing. I mean, imagine, the president or the richest man, whoever that happens to be at the moment, comes up and says, "I'll give you anything you want." Most of us would start with a laundry list of, all right, wait, this is a big and important one. I want this, 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 and this, and this. Diogenes says, right now, all I'm wanting to do is warm myself in the sun. Get out of my sun, and that's all I need. He ends up demonstrating here that wanting what he doesn't need is foolishness, and therefore anything that can be offered to him by the most powerful man in the world at the time, and accepting that, would be contrary to his philosophy. He doesn't need anything right now other than to lay in the sun, to warm himself in the sun, and therefore anything else is contrary to what he wanted. As a figure, it's really hard to understand if these stories are true about Diogenes. There's a lot of stories that originate about him later on, and sometimes they're not true. We do know some things about Diogenes. That he had very little concern for patriotism or group identity. That he likely grew up in Sinope, which is the coast of the Black Sea. Sometimes, again, he'll be referred to as Diogenes of Sinope. And that his father minted coins there, that this was his job. Later on, he will move to Athens or Corinth, and then later Athens. That he lived rather simply. Usually he's depicted as living in a barrel or a very large wine vessel that's no longer in use, and this was his home, just basic shelter at this point. And that he believed that freedom of speech was the greatest freedom of man. That being able to say whatever you want is really the hallmark of man's existence. And so many of the different stories that we have, as long as they fit within this framework, we can go ahead and accept a little bit as being true, even though, again, it's quite possible that they're exaggerations to one extent or another. We also know that either Diogenes or his father, at some point, defaced coins that were minted in Sinope. Now, this might not mean much to us, because you've got coins that you throw around and you don't care about. But one, this is the main currency. Two, defacing literally means defacing. Removing the face, removing the identity of who's on that coin. who's on that coin is usually the emperor, a king, somebody of power and political importance. And so destroying that is destroying society. It's destroying the rule. It's fighting against the system, as many of us might have modern notions of cynicism wrapped up in there. It's also really interesting to note that in Greek, the word for coin and social convention is also very close. Customs and coins are almost the same word. They're not the same word, but they're close enough that when we see him defacing the coins, that also shows us that he's defacing society. Now, we did actually find coins that were defaced in Sinope, and so for those who are interested in this, it becomes really exciting. And it was either his father kind of denying his occupation and saying, I'm done with this, and maybe giving Diogenes some of the earlier ideas of it, or it's Diogenes rejecting the life of his father and moving forward. Now, what's really interesting is that he's also going to say that the love of money is the mother city of all evils. So there is also a rejection of money itself and love of money. He says this is the mother city of all evils. This is where evils come from. Diogenes really didn't care for social conventions, nor for the wealthy. There's one story of him where he was invited to a wealthy man's house, and lots of people liked having Diogenes around. He was such an extreme character that really it was exciting to have him around. And while he's there, Diogenes turns and he spits in the man's face. Everyone looks upon Diogenes and asks him, why? Here you are, the guest of this man's house. All social conventions would, obviously, this is not okay. Diogenes responds, everything else around you is too nice. I can't spit on any of that. Or I spit on your face. This is a very odd way of approaching life. Denying everything around him and everyone else kind of going along with it. Now, this doesn't mean that he didn't beg for food and for money to buy food. While he would normally be invited places or scrape together what he could to live off of that day, he didn't work at any point. And so still, you don't always get what you want. In fact, he even practiced begging in front of statues so he could get used to being rejected. But he would beg nonetheless. Now, if he thinks that money is an evil, or the mother city of all evils, and he doesn't like the wealthy, isn't begging to live a little hypocritical? Wouldn't it be more virtuous and honest to go get a job, to do something, even if it's a job for a day, to get food for the day? Diogenes says no. He's got a nice little argument that he uses to try to show why it's not hypocritical for him to beg. He says that, first of all, we all acknowledge that all things belong to the gods. Therefore, what's yours really belongs to the gods, not you. You're just a steward of it. You just care for it. So it's not really yours anyways. 2, the wise are viewed as friends of the gods. And of course, Diogenes says that he's wise. Therefore, he's one of the friends of the gods. 3, he points out that friends share everything. If we're really friends, you wouldn't reject me in my basic needs. Therefore, all things really belong to the wise. So while you might have money, while you might have food, it really belongs to me, not you. Cynics often serve as religious critics as well. They're not atheists. They don't deny the gods, but they didn't like popular religious practice. They really didn't like everything surrounding the temples and the monetary systems that they seemed to be connected to. Once a temple priest was out there preaching about how great and splendid a reward in the afterlife would be and how great his reward would be. Antisthenes is said to have replied, then why don't you just die already? Why don't you just die? If all of your rewards are great once you die, then just die. Kind of cutting quick and cutting to the bone, right? He also once saw a temple thief getting arrested by temple officials, and he said, look, there are big thieves carrying away little thieves. Again, really criticizing the sort of exuberance about the next life and the monetary wealth that they have. Cynics will say of themselves that they rejected not the gods, but false conceptions of the divine. Right? They are holding on to the divine, but saying most of you who are painting pictures of the gods aren't right. This is really in keeping with what they said of wealth, freedom, and power as well. The Cynics wants everyone to have true wealth, true freedom, and true power. Wealth itself is useless to ensure a good life, though people like Aristotle will say that there is a place for wealth and that it aids in the pursuit for virtue. Diogenes doesn't hold this. He sees wealth as an impediment, especially seeking wealth or prioritizing wealth. You're either going to build up your own wealth, making you think that you're secure, or people are going to ask for it and demand it for basic life. And they say, this isn't what life is. Diogenes, in many ways, is crazy. Sometimes it's been said of him that he is Socrates gone mad. This is what Plato's said of Diogenes. Plato and Diogenes encountered each other on multiple occasions, and they debated as to the nature of what humans really were. Plato will define man as a featherless biped. Diogenes then plucked a chicken and held it up to Plato and said, "Behold the man." Obviously trying to show that you're wrong with what you think the nature of humanity is. Diogenes also will insult almost anybody, in addition to spitting in the face of the wealthy who host him. Bald man once insulted Diogenes, and Diogenes replied, "Far be it from me to make insults, but I do want to compliment your hair for having abandoned such a worthless head." Nice sort of fun response there. Later writing will give us a little bit more information about Diogenes. Licinius, a Cynic follower of Diogenes, is said to have a sort of dialogue very similar to what we see with what Plato does with dialogues with Socrates. Licinius does this as well. While addressing this, the Cynic, or a Cynic, is usually seen as who Diogenes was, not even giving him his name, but just the ideal Cynic here. Licinius says, "Give an account of yourself, my man. You wear a beard and you let your hair grow. You eschew shirts, you exhibit your skin. Your feet are bare, you choose a wandering outcast beastly life. Unlike other people, you make your own body the object of your severities. You go from place to place, sleeping on hard ground where chance finds you." And what does the Cynic respond? What does he reply? "It meets my needs. It was easy to come by, and it gives its owner no trouble. It is the cloak for me. Pray tell me, do you not call extravagance a vice?" So in this dialogue, what we see very easily with Diogenes is it goes, yeah, I've got to let my beard and my hair grow. I don't wear extra shirts. I don't have fancy clothes or shoes or anything else around me. It's fine. It's my body. It's whatever. It's what I got. Don't you think extravagance is a vice, by the way? Licinius, oh yes. Cynic, consequently, neither my feet nor the rest of my body need protection. It seems if they did, they would be in bad condition. For want is always an evil and deteriorates the thing concerned. But again, there's no sign either of my body being nourished, the worse for its nourishments being of a common sort. And I'm not worse off because I don't have all of these things. My feet aren't destroyed. My skin isn't destroyed. I'm not malnourished. I have enough. The old cloak, the shaggy hair, the whole getup that you ridicule has this effect. It enables me to live a quiet life, doing as I will, and keeping the company I want. No ignorant, uneducated person will have anything to say to one dressed like this. And the soft livers turn the other way as soon as I am in sight. But the refined, the reasonable, the earnest seek me out. They are the men who seek me, because they are the men I wish to see. Right? There's a second benefit that we have, according to Diogenes, by living in this way. Most people will run away from me. And he says, perfect. I don't want to talk to them. I don't want them around me. But those who are actually seeking out wisdom will come. They'll hear about me and they'll approach me. They will address me in this way. And that's what I want. So while I might look mad, I might look crazy, you're the ones who are extravagant. You're the ones who have more than you need. And isn't that a vice? I also then don't have to deal with most of you, which is a virtue in his respect. Diogenes and later Cynics really deny most social conventions, even those surrounding life and death. At one point it says that Diogenes was sick unto death. And so he went over to a bridge. And the keeper of the bridge, who was high up, he either commissioned him to throw himself off the bridge or to wait until Diogenes died there and then to throw his body off of the bridge into the river. Because why is there any purpose in keeping my body? There's no reason for burial. There's no reason for anything else. Death is just that last part of life, and if there's too much pain, end it. If there's a dead body, get rid of it. There's no real value in maintaining any of these things, according to Diogenes. And so, at least at the end of his life, he was consistent with this. Likely, his death was also because he ate some bad food. And there's many different accounts of Diogenes eating food and getting rather sick of it because it had spoiled, because it had gone bad, because it's not good. But like a dog, he found it, gathered it, and consumed it. And so this is possibly also the main cause of his death. So if we don't hold on any social conventions, how should we look at life? Tellus, a later Cynic, tells us how we should do this. He says, don't try to alter circumstances, but adapt to them as they are. Don't hold dogmatic ideas of what things ought to be, but instead look at things as they are and approach them as they are. For example, look at sailors. They don't try to change the wind and the sea. They learn to cope with them in their various moods. The weather is fair, the sea is calm, they bring out the oars into service. The wind is with them now they hoist full sail. The wind is against them. The sails are reefed and allowed to go slack. You should be just as attentive to the conditions and just as ready to adjust. We would find it insane for a sailor to say, no, my sail will always be up, or I will always be rowing, regardless of what the wind is doing and the conditions of the sea. That'll bring about ruin and destruction. So no, that shouldn't be what you do. You should adapt to what the conditions are. And this is exactly what you should be doing as well. Further encounter once had between Diogenes and a fellow man, Tellus recalls this event by saying, he did unwell on one occasion when someone gave him a shove and put him in a headlock. Instead of engaging the man in a wrestling match, Diogenes took a stand before him, showed him his penis, and said, try, sir, to wrestle me to the ground by applying pressure to this. Now, this obviously doesn't fit within any social conventions. This is not a, oh, well, it was okay, you know, the Greeks. No, this is totally just out there. Why would Diogenes do such a thing? Well, one, he doesn't care about social convention, and two, it accomplished the goals. Diogenes wasn't going to win in a wrestling match with this man. But instead, this man now felt shame, felt embarrassed, felt like he wanted to get away, and therefore he went away, and Diogenes got everything he wanted. Freedom. No longer being accosted by this individual. Whatever. It was easy to do. Tellus also tells us that we need to learn to scorn pleasure, to respect hard work, which is odd for a cynic, but that's what he's saying. Ignore reputation, good or bad, and not to fear death. And you will be able to do anything you want, and gladly too. He also says, if one were to use the abundance of pleasure as the standard of a happy life, as we see with the ideas of the Epicureans, right, the hedonists that want to have a good, pleasurable life, as well as what most of us probably say we want. Crates said, what would prove us happy? If you want to review the various stages of your life, you will find that pain and suffering predominate, and by no small measure. Right? Life is pain. Life is always going to have pain. And it's only in our minds that we create things that are different, according to Tellus. Tellus asks you to look back over your life. As a babe, you have no power, no control. You're being fed and taken care of on the whims of others. You're always crying out in pain for something more. In adolescence, you're being bossed around by parents or teachers. Tellus also says you're getting beaten by your gymnasium teachers. Likely, hopefully, that wasn't the case for any of us. But for some it is. It was more common in different eras as well. Then you get into adolescence, your early life. You start to work and suffer and toil. And then, by the time you're finally able to have some security, what happens? Your pain moves from your labor to your body as you're too old and you're always injured. And now, in middle age and older life, you're always thinking in about 2 weeks I won't be in any more pain. I won't have a backache, a knee ache, a muscle ache out of nowhere because I slept wrong. Right? Life throughout all of it is pain. And you look back upon your youth and say, oh, if only then. But your youth wasn't great, and old age isn't going to be great. Life is pain. Don't use pleasure as the standard of a good life. So, if we're not going to see pleasure being the main aspect of life, can we have a life with pleasure? Unlike the hedonists who argue that we want pleasure, the cynics have no value placed on pleasure in itself. There's no value on pleasure. This is a radical departure from not only the hedonists, who believe this is the chief aim, but other philosophies of the day. It goes against Plato and Aristotle, who thought that pleasure can be an instrument in virtue. If the idea that we abandon all pleasure was seen by even Socrates as too demanding. For them, pleasure was not the good, but it certainly was a good. A good life was pleasant because it contained the pleasures of virtue and contemplation, and this is a good thing. Yet abandoning pleasure is really what the cynics are calling us to do. Or more accurately, it's to abandon the pursuit of pleasure. The closest thing that we have from Diogenes or anyone else of the cynics that endorses the idea of pleasure is when Diogenes said that refraining from pleasure is itself pleasant. There's some sort of pleasantness in refraining from pleasure. There is a story of Diogenes finding a sweet in his breakfast, and then immediately he threw it away, saying, "Away with the tyrant, go away." Why? Why would we get rid of a sweet in our breakfast? He's begging for food. Somebody obviously did him a kindness and gave him something a little nicer. Yes, but if it's nicer and I get accustomed to it, I'll want it. Get away from it. I'm no longer going to want and crave it. Right? It's like Lay's potato chips, right? I bet you can't eat just one. Yeah, because you had chemicals in there that tricks my brain to wanting more. You can have 0 easily, but just one? That becomes tricky. Right? That becomes part of the whole debate and discussion here. Don't have a little bit of something that's going to want you to want more. It's better to say no entirely than just a little bit. Antisthenes also said that madness itself was preferable to pleasure. That being crazy is better than wanting pleasure. Because you're, again, at this point, you're free from everything else around you. For the Cynics, what we need is a life of toil. Toil is not actual work. Don't mistake me there. Remember, you're begging, you're not working. But it means choosing a hard life. Bad clothes, no shoes. Remember the description of Diogenes. You wear your beard and you let your hair grow. You eschew shirts, you exhibit your skin. Your feet are bare. You choose a wandering, outcast, and beastly life. And the answer is yes, exactly. This is the life that I have. This is what we should be pursuing because this is what is natural. Cynicism affirms what they view as nature, as natural. What do you have in nature? What do you see in the world around you? There's very little in the realm of pleasure that exists all around you. There's constant struggle and toil to survive. All animals are laboring all the time, flying all over the place to stay warm, to find food. Flourishing of life and then getting consumed and destroyed by others around them. This is what you see in nature. Society is seen as unnatural. Diogenes, even on multiple occasions, tried to eat raw meat. Usually ended up getting him sick. Because again, is that more natural? Disdaining pleasure, but fulfilling base impulses whenever they wanted. Diogenes was once asked why he ate in the market, something that you would not have done in Athenian society. You take it home and eat, and there is Diogenes eating on public display. And his answer was, that's where I got hungry. Makes sense, right? Most of us would generally agree. Why is it you are eating there? Why is it you're doing this? You're not supposed to do that. Well, that's where I'm hungry, so that's why I'm doing that. Diogenes also famously masturbated in public and asked why. He said he only wished he could get rid of his hunger by rubbing his belly. I've got a natural impulse, I'm taking care of it. It's now done. He was brought to the theater to try to give his masterpiece and display it for everybody, to speak of his wisdom. What does Diogenes do? He takes a crap and he says, behold the masterpiece. This is what I produce. This is what I have. Not extra fancy philosophical talk. Base whatever. You want to know what it is that I make? This is what I make. Again, a little on the graphic side. The Cynic Crates and his wife, who was wealthy before they were married, Hipparchia, would also engage in sex in public. This was shocking. This was absolutely shocking. This isn't okay in society. This was seen as too much. But why? Well, because this is where we want to go. This is the urge that we have. By the way, when they got married, they also quickly took all of her wealth and threw it out the window and then went and lived in the street. Again, at least they're being consistent with that, right? Pleasures are fine for cynics, though, if they require little or no effort. But don't make your happiness based upon trying to find difficult pleasures. If it's not easy to get, don't do it. Do what's basic and easy. Really, what you need to find are pleasures that are easy and self-sufficient. Things that you have control of, not things that are beyond this in any way. This is what they say you need. We're stuck, though, in many ways, because we don't know what we need. Right? right? We can think of popular culture having discussions on needs, right? If you're familiar with the Jungle Book and the song, right? The bare necessities. What do you need is the bare necessities. All you need is the basic things. You need a little bit of food. You need a little bit of shelter. We've talked about this multiple times already with different philosophies of life, but if all you need is the bare necessities, why would you want to do more? Why do you want more things? Conversely, if you are familiar with the movie Spaceballs, hilarious, great movie, highly recommend. Right? Lone Star tells the princess to, or abandoning ship, take only what you need to survive. And they're carrying bags of luggage. They open it up and she says, it's my industrial strength hairdryer and I can't live without it. I have to have it. You don't really need that. It's causing extra work. It's causing extra labor. You might need it when it's time to dry your hair, but you're in a desert and you're walking and trying to find a place to survive. That's not going to work. Which one of these is better? Living off of the bare necessities, forgetting about your worries and your strife? Or holding on to things, saying, I can't live without it? I know most of you would probably still say, I can't live without it. I kind of still like it. I want that. Yeah, I know there's worries and strife by holding these things. It's causing more labor, but what do I do? Can't just forget it all. That's what the cynics are telling you to do. That's why cynicism is a shortcut to virtue. Again, you might not see it as all that virtuous in many of its respects, but you're forgetting about everything else of society. This is what you're being called to do. Again, is that really reasonable? Is that doable? That's for you to decide. Cynicism has got a lot of different ideas in modern society that isn't all that connected to Diogenes in many different ways. And it kind of grew in its own popular other idea that existed even during the Roman imperial period. People would claim to be a cynic, but, I don't agree with social conventions. Give me money. I'll take more money, please. I only want the fanciest food, right? And all of a sudden, you might have had the garment of a cynic, but your life wasn't like that of a cynic. And in many ways, a lot of people are like, yeah, down with the system, and I don't like social conventions today, but are you really willing to abandon all of the rest of society? Because that's what cynicism really demands of you. Cynicism is not supposed to be an excuse for debauchery, because it's not about pleasure. You need to live up to these early standards of cynicism if you want to adopt it. It's not something you can have a little bit of in many ways, right? It needs to be something that encompasses your life, right? Your pleasure should only be easy and self-sufficient and not complicated and dependent upon others. Julian the Apostate was one of those who criticized pop cynicism of his day. He didn't like the idea that a lot of people would pretend to be cynics and not live up to it. Julian took this extra personal as the nephew of Constantine the Great, living in the now Christianizing Rome. Julian wanted to return it back to its pagan glory days and saw things like real cynicism as something that should be aspired to and cultivated in society. Instead, he saw the actual life of people calling themselves cynics as not holding up to this and therefore weakening his position as trying to de-establish Christianity in the Roman Empire. It wasn't going to last very long. Julian's reign will be short and incomplete in this task, although he did advocate and advance a lot of Neoplatonic thought as well as true in his notions, ideas of cynicism. He really wanted to convince people to pursue paganism and Cynicism was one of these tools. He was an apologist for cynicism. He tried to make it sound as good as possible. Therefore, he says, freedom from emotion they regard as the end and aim. And this is equivalent to becoming a god. Now, the end and aim of the Cynic philosophy, as indeed every philosophy, is happiness. But it's not. Julian's wrong, right? But happiness that consists in living according to nature. Living according to nature is indeed the emphasis here, and not according to the opinions of the multitude. Though we know from others, right, that this isn't really the argument of what cynicism is. This is what Julian is advocating this for. He says, then, it is not absurd when a human being tries to find happiness somewhere outside of himself, and thinks that wealth and birth and influence of friends, and generally speaking, everything of that sort, is the utmost importance. Right? None of these things are going to really make you happy. But this is what Julian is advocating too. Don't look at it this way. Happiness is found in ourselves and our own perception of the world. He says, you think, do you not, that for mankind, freedom is the beginning of all good things? I mean, of course, what people are always calling good. And how could they deny it? For property, money, birth, physical strength, beauty in the world, everything of that sort, when divorced from freedom, are surely blessings that belong, not to him who merely seems to enjoy them, but him who is that man's master. It is only in freedom that we can really enjoy the things of this world. It is only in freedom that we can find any value in our property, in our birth, our strength, our beauty. If you're not free, if these are all chains around your neck, then it doesn't do you any good. You'll need to be happy in yourself and not attached to these that can be owned and controlled by somebody else. If you're ruled by your property, by your money, by your birth, by strength or beauty, then you are a slave and they don't benefit you, but they own you. It doesn't mean you can't have it, but you can't pursue it as the aim. And this is what Julian, the apostate, the apologist for both Neoplatonism and for cynicism, is advocating for. He's wanting people to take this on, to reject all of the externalities and try to find happiness within, which again is not exactly what cynicism was advocating for, but is closer to it than what he saw around him during his life. The debate between Stoics and Cynics is really over the issue of what can be known. And this will help give us a basis for being able to understand and shape our philosophy of life moving forward. If we can know anything, then we need to proceed off of that and hold that in earnestness. The Stoics advocated that reason can tell us the truth, while Cynics says that nothing can really ever be known for certain. Live like an animal. Take what you can get. While the Stoics kind of develop ethics of virtue and try to live with one another, the Cynics reject all social conventions, many of those social conventions advocated by Stoics. And while Stoics will try to live in society, Cynics live in barrels and on the streets and take from society whatever society will give them. Stoics would look at man much more closer to Plato as a featherless biped, while Cynics will pluck this chicken and say, behold man, that there's nothing innate in here. Stoics will teach emperors, and Cynics don't care about what is around them. They want to answer the question of why bother? Well, that's really the question. The Stoics say there's so much to contribute and to give, and that'll help you thrive. And the Cynics say, maybe not. In many ways, Cynics are a lot closer to the skeptics than they are to the Stoics. right? When we ask that question of what can be known for certain, and how should you live based upon what you know? And these are the key questions for skeptics. This is largely the questions of Pyrrho, right? How are things by their nature, and what attitude should we adopt to that, and what would the outcome be? Well, what do we know about nature? If it's indeterminable, the skeptics say, don't have any judgments. The cynics don't say everything is indeterminable, but much more base and animalistic. It might be chaotic, but it's not indeterminable. How should you live? Take what you got for the day. Question really, after all of this, is cynicism a shortcut to virtue? Is this something virtuous or not? And if not, or if so, why? You almost have to make an argument for it to be one way or the other. Really, we're left with that question again, is cynicism a shortcut to virtue? How does it work when we're going to equate it with other ethical systems, or even systems of life during the time of things like Epicureanism and Stoicism, even skepticism? Is this something that's going to win? Is it going to thrive and overcome that? Or is it something that sounds really nice and a couple of extreme people maybe, and maybe for you, but you have to be really extreme, and that's probably too much? Can we take the philosophy of Antisthenes, Diogenes, Tellus, and Julian the Apostate and say that there's elements in there that we can take and mature and grow and understand? Or is this a philosophy that should die on the vine? It's kind of fun to know about, but really it isn't going to be fruitful moving forward. Really, these are different questions you can think of, but it's good to be encountering these ideas, if nothing else, to understand the diversity of systems of life that existed in Athens at the same time, with radical notions of departure. I mean, here we are with cynicism at the same time as Aristotle, and even Socrates, if we're going to include Antisthenes. These debates are things that everyone is having, but yet some slowly move away and others become ascendant.